It's a brave bastion of Nicaragua's revolution that helped overthrow the Somoza dictatorship of 4 decades ago that today finds itself besieged by the Sandinista government it once supported. The crackdown in Masaya seems like the endgame this time around, treated like an endgame by the longtime government of Daniel Ortega. 280 killed since April in what started then as peaceful protests against pension reform. Truth be told, a lot's happened since the days when the Sandinistas embodied the resistance against U.S. hegemony in the Americas. Ortega himself has been in and out of power, and his politics have shifted. Yes, he can still count on the backing of the likes of Cuba and Venezuela, but do old left versus right fault lines still apply in this case? As the Organization of American States convenes in Washington over the crisis, we'll be asking, just like we've done with Venezuela or Nicaragua's neighbor Honduras, what response and how to stop the violence. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if Nicaragua has reached its boiling point. Joining us from London, she's the founder of the Bianca Jagger Foundation for Human Rights. Bianca Jagger, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
From Managua, he was Daniel Ortega's vice president. Today, Sergio Ramirez opposes him. Welcome to the show. Nicaraguan journalist Cindy Regidor joins us from San Jose, the capital of neighboring Costa Rica. Thank you for being with us. And here in the studio, we're joined by George Kuzmanovic, spokesperson on international affairs for the left-wing Unbowed France Party, La France Insoumise. Good evening. Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Nicaragua's government claiming victory over what it's been calling a coup attempt. This after pro-Ortega forces broke up barricades and crushed dissent on Tuesday in Masaya. Wasim Cornet has more.
As the camera pans right, a glimpse of the battle between opposition members and pro-government forces. Nicaraguan youth hiding behind a stone barricade, shooting a homemade mortar. This was the scene in a neighborhood known as Monimbo in the city of Masaya on Tuesday.
They started attacking us at 6 a.m. They've surrounded us completely, but we're trying to resist. We need help. We need munitions and medical help for our wounded.
Across the city, church bells were sounded to warn residents of the danger. A bishop in Managua echoed the threat.
They're attacking Monimbo. Bullets have reached the Maria Magdalena parish, where a priest is sheltering. Daniel Ortega, you must stop this massacre. To the inhabitants of Monimbo, I beg you, save yourselves.
The police chief made it clear the government was intent on using force to crush resistance against President Daniel Ortega.
We, the police, have a commitment and an order from our president and our vice president to clean the barricades at a national level. We are going to comply, whatever the cost.
Several reports also indicated youth being taken away by pro-government militia.
Daniel Ortega has become a criminal who has broken Nicaraguan law, which forbids armed aggression against unarmed civilians. He has committed a crime against humanity.
The city of Masaya had become the heart of Nicaragua's protest movement against Daniel Ortega, leaving the embattled president in a struggle for survival. Masaya is symbolically important in Nicaragua. It was the home of the 1979 uprising, which ultimately toppled the country's brutal dictatorship. This Thursday will mark the 39th anniversary of that uprising, which could explain the push to suppress the protest movement.
It'll be the 39th anniversary on Thursday, as Wasim was saying. Bianca Jagger, your reaction to those images out of Masaya?
I am shocked and appalled for what Daniel Ortega is doing to the unarmed population of Masaya, of Granada, of Monimbo, the attack on the students where many of them were killed, and so were yesterday. You know, I am in contact with the students as well as with people. I was with people in Monimbo who were calling me and were saying, please help, they are going to kill us. We need the international community to act and to do something concrete to be able to stop the onslaught, the slaughter of the civilian population in Nicaragua. My reaction as a human rights defender, as a Nicaraguan, is that I'm shocked and appalled to see this man who once was a revolutionary leader of the Sandinista revolution, who now has become a murderous dictator who has no scruples, who will kill children, who will kill young people, women, who will attack the bishops, and who is out to kill anyone who will express any disagreement with his government.
The government claims that it's fully retaken. Is it over for now?
It is not over for now. He might have, you know, been able to. They are claiming victory. They are such a coward, so despicable. The death squads who are attacking the population, who have AK-47, Uzis, they have armed weapons. And by the way, Russia is supporting Nicaragua as well and have sold them 50 tanks, which I hope that he will never dare to use. But how can you claim victory against unarmed civilians? What is he thinking? But there are millions and millions of Nicaragua. There is at least 70% of the population who opposes Daniel Ortega. I have been there. I have marched with the people when he attacked them on Mother's Day and killed 18 people, young people, and wounded between 70 and 80.
Sergio Ramirez, we're on the eve of the 39th anniversary of the Sandinista revolution. What's it like today in Managua after what's transpired in Masaya?
Good evening. I am in Managua, effectively. Thank you. Thank you.
The question is, what's the mood where you are after what transpired in Masaya and on the eve of the anniversary of the revolution?
Well, it is very sad because I participated actively in the revolution. I was part of the civilian leadership of the revolution. We fought for ideals. We fought for a different kind of country we should live in. And now it is all the contrary. What we have is dictatorship, brutal dictatorship, that is against all the principles we fought for 40 years ago. I should say that the regime we have now in Nicaragua doesn't have anything to do with what was the revolution, the ideal of the revolution, the targets of the revolution.
When did it all change?
The reasons why we fought against. Well, it changed when Ortega became the unique leader of the Sandinist front after we lost elections in 1990. And then he started to depend more and more on his wife till both of them came to represent all powers in Nicaragua. And this is the tragedy that has occurred during the last 10 years. A family that has been taking power completely in Nicaragua against any principle of democracy, liberty, or justice.
So let me ask you at this point, Cindy Regidor, your thoughts on why the crackdown has been so hard. You heard there Sergio Ramirez pin part of the blame on Rosario Murillo, the wife of President Ortega, and the vice president. And your thoughts on why it's so violent?
Well, it is very peculiar because
very resentful of the fact that
Cindy Regidor.
Yes, sorry. I think that Ortega and Mario Murillo and about the fact that historical Sandinista back, and that has changed.
Cindy, I'm going to have to interrupt you because unfortunately the
very symbolic way.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we're having sound issues. We're going to try to fix those and get back to you as quickly as we can. George Kuzmanovic, your thoughts on what's going on? You heard there Sergio Ramirez describe how Ortega lost at the ballot box, was voted back into power, and when he came back, took this stance that never again he wanted to leave power.
Well, once he left power already in the beginning of the 90s. So, and all the election he won them fairly. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. He has a strong support that is called Daniel, which is very strange. Is the policy that he tried to imply that lead to this demonstration that are quite for us strange because they're very liberal in a European sense of way. It's austerity policies against retired people, against students, and then you had those demonstrations that are completely legitimate. And of course, the government cannot arm at that level the people. But there is another problem: is that there as well you have the involvement of the United States, and unfortunately, the people.
How so?
As always. I mean, it's always the policy of the United States. There you have also, among the dead people, you have dead people on the Ortega side. You have dead among the policemen. You have weapons. It's like Venezuela. The problem is that some people, they use this legitimate and popular demonstration to push their agenda and to remove from the power the people they do not accept that were legitimately elected. But once again, legitimately elected.
So you're saying the United States? Why do you think the United States has a hand in this?
Because this country has an history.
Going on past record, or is there proof this time around?
No, on past record, it's there. It's involvement of during Reagan administration. It's 60,000 dead people, 300,000 that were moved in a country of a little bit more than 3 million people, and it's the trend of the United States to change regimes that are not that they do not like, and it's visible since the Condor operations.
Can I answer that?
Yes, I finish, please. Since the Condor operation, Chile, what is going on now in Brazil, and that's the problem. It's the tension. Is you have regimes that are reacting. Once again, the violence is unacceptable, but they are reacting because they are awaiting a more violent reaction from the people that will come out if they lose power.
Bianca Jagger?
Yes. Let me first clarify one thing. Daniel Ortega won some elections early on. He lost in 1990. And then the last two elections were fraudulent. He has managed to dismantle all legal institutions in Nicaragua. But one important thing that I may add is that when Daniel Ortega came, for those who think that Daniel Ortega is a progressive government, they are wrong. When he came to power, the first thing he did later on was to make a deal and make pacts with the most corrupt segment of the population, with the former president, Alemán. And he made a deal with him so that they could both control the General Assembly, and Alemán had been in jail, and by allowing him to come out of that jail, he was able to make all the changes that he wanted to the Constitution, to the point that Daniel Ortega today can run for president for life. The other thing that is important to understand is that, no, This is not the US. This is not a right-wing conspiracy. This is not the CIA. As we all know, Donald Trump is not really interested in Latin America. He's certainly not interested in Nicaragua. Some members of Congress and some members of the Senate are imposing on Nicaragua the Magnitsky law against some of the culprits in Nicaragua. And I do hope, and I hope that many of the people who are watching this program know very well that I was a voice against the Contra war, that I was a voice against any foreign intervention in any country in the world, and certainly any intervention in Nicaragua. I think that the international community needs to act. The United States should apply the Magnitsky law to Daniel Ortega and to Rosario Murillo. And I hope that the European community will really come out and support Nicaragua and put an end to the slaughter that the Nicaraguans are suffering.
Cindy Regidor?
Excuse me?
Yes, I definitely agree with Bianca. I know that if you see this issue in Nicaragua from outside, and you know the history and the 80s and the CIA involvement, you would think that this is the CIA and the US doing their thing again, but it's definitely not. You can see it in the streets. I've been to Nicaragua working on the field, interviewing people, and it is just impossible to believe that this is some kind of planned attack against a left-wing government. This is the people who are very, very upset about the fact that the government, instead of protecting them, are actually sending people to kill them.
All right, of course, that's not how the government sees it. Paul Oquist is Daniel Ortega's Minister for National Policies. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The good news in Nicaragua is that the coup has failed. The attempt to carry out a coup d'etat in Nicaragua is already defeated. And that is very good news, because what it leaves then is dialogue, because the coup plotters did not want dialogue. The solution in Nicaragua is dialogue, stopping violence, restoring mutual trust, building peace. And we know that that is much more than just the absence of violence. The bar is set high. National reconciliation must also be achieved so that Nicaraguans can rebuild the country.
All right, and I can see panelists shaking their heads. We're going to pick up on that point. When we come back, you're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we are looking at Nicaragua reaching a boiling point. At least 280 killed since what started as peaceful protests against pension reform back in mid-April. With us to talk about it, human rights defender Bianca Jagger, who is the founder of the Bianca Jagger Foundation for Human Rights. She's in London. In Managua, Nicaragua, Nicaragua's former vice president, Sergio Ramirez, who opposes today Daniel Ortega. Nicaraguan journalist Cindy Regidor joins us from San Jose, capital of Costa Rica. And here in the studio, George Kuzmanovic of the France Insoumise Party, the Unbowed France is how we translate, the left-wing party. Daniel Ortega, as we were saying in part one, known for his ups and downs over the years. After having been voted out, the 72-year-old leader now refusing calls by some to move up the elections and stage them earlier than planned. Yenna Lee has more.
The son of a shoemaker turned into a revolutionary hero. Daniel Ortega joined the Sandinista National Liberation Front, a left-wing movement that brought down the dynastic dictatorship of the Somoza family. He then led the Sandinista revolution from 1979 to 1990, fighting against the US-backed anti-socialist Contra militias. Ortega became president in 1985, but the war raged on until his electoral defeat by Violeta Chamorro 5 years later. Changing his military fatigues into white shirts, replacing Marxist slogans with a pro-business platform, Daniel Ortega made a successful comeback in 2006 and is now in his third consecutive term as president. Under Ortega's leadership and his cozy relationship with business leaders, Nicaragua has seen an annual average growth of 4.2%, one of the highest rates in the region. Foreign investment streamed into the country, as did help from leftist ally Venezuela in the form of loans and cheap oil. But opponents say Ortega is an elected autocrat. They say he has put his friends into the courts, the media and the police, and accused the president of vote rigging. Also wary of Ortega's choice to make his wife, Rosario Murillo, into his vice president, detractors are fearful of a president they say is cementing his grip on power. Months of deadly protests has affected the economy, and the country's private business association is now saying their alliance with Ortega was a mistake. For his supporters, he remains a revolutionary hero who has dedicated his life to public service. For his critics, Ortega has betrayed his values and is fast becoming much like the dictator he once helped depose.
Bianca Jagger, let me ask you about, we saw images of her there, of Mrs. Murillo. For those who don't follow Nicaragua closely, there's a bit of suspicion when you point the finger at the wife. It can smack sometimes of misogyny. We've seen it in other countries. Oh, the leader's not so bad, it's his wife who's evil.
Well, let me tell you, it was not me who said that to begin with. The story of why she is the vice president is a long story, but has to do with the claim by her stepdaughter that Daniel Ortega raped her from the age of 11 onward. And that is a very public issue. But Mrs. Murillo stood with her husband. I wouldn't say that it is only Rosario Murillo. They are together in power. But let me address one important thing that Mr. Oquis brought up, which is the issue of the national dialogue in Nicaragua. In fact, it is the Conference of Bishops who had been at the forefront trying to bring the president and all the civil society and students and the poor farmers to the table. But Daniel Ortega, while he was claiming to be participating in this dialogue, he was killing the people with who he was supposed to be negotiating. And as of now, right now, the leader of the poor farmers is in jail, and he doesn't even have access to have a lawyer. And he looks as if he has been beaten up. So what kind of dialogue is Mr. Oquis talking about? It's a mockery of the people of Nicaragua. Are you aware that the bishops have been attacked and aggressed, and that their lives are under threat, and that as we speak now, a very valiant and courageous bishop, which is called Silvio Baez, has been threatened, has been hidden, and they have become the enemy of the Ortega dictatorship.
George Kuzmanovic, when the Sandinista revolution happened, people then were siding with the working class priests of liberation theology. Now Ortega has, in his second coming, if you will, to power, taken a very hard line, supporting draconian anti-abortion laws, and ignoring effectively those attempts at mediation by the church. Your thoughts on that?
Well, Mr. Ortega changed a lot in his minds and his politics. And regarding the problem of abortion, I'm sorry, but all Latin America is problematic. I think that all the progressive governments, even in Chile, they didn't succeed to adopt law on abortion. So it's not only the problem of Nicaragua, and the President Ortega made an alliance with the Catholics, and he's pushing their program.
Is he left-wing today? I mean, he sided with business leaders. Is he still a left-wing
Well, he's saying
guy?
himself Catholic. He's pushing very austerity policies. Well, I don't know if it's anymore a left government. But I would like to come back on the U.S. issue. I don't know if there is someone... once again, I said that the demonstrations are legitimate, Mr. Jäger. But I don't know if the United States are behind. But look at the other countries that
no, sir.
nobody...
No, sir, they are not.
I said,
I'm
I don't know.
sorry to say,
Yes,
this is a popular insurrection. It is a peaceful
Yes, I said I don't know.
The
I say I don't know.
Are not armed
I say I don't know,
Nicaragua.
but I know that...
No, but I am telling you categorically, I'm in Nicaragua, and I have been to Nicaragua recently. I was there less than a month ago, and I can tell you that this is not an American influence resistance from the people. You have people from all sides. And if you believe that Daniel Ortega is a progressive or a leftist government, you must be dreaming.
No.
The people with whom he made deals was with the richest family in Nicaragua, to whom he gave tax advantages. And that's why they stood with him. Today, some of them are silent, and many of them admit that it was a mistake.
Yes, I know. I said that you are right, and I said that I don't think is really progressive government. I agree with you. And I said that I don't know if the United States are now behind a legitimate demonstration. But what I know is that here, nobody's speaking about what's going on in Honduras. And there also...
I am, sir.
Maybe you... I do not accuse you.
Sir.
You understand that I do not accuse you.
I have spoken against the
I do not accuse you, Mrs. And you
Honduras.
cannot cut all the time people when they're speaking. I'm saying here that nobody is speaking about what is going on in Honduras, where you have also hundreds of people that are killed by the power that was put there by the United States after a coup in 2009. You have unlegitimate judges that put Lula in jail and that are parading in Washington. So we see that in other countries in Latin America, the hands of the United States are still there. I hope for Nicaragua that they're not.
Let me bring in Sergio Ramirez. Mr. Ramirez, as we speak, representatives of the Organization of American States convening in Washington, talking about the crisis in Nicaragua. What do you think about the United States? What should they be doing? What are they doing when it comes to this crisis?
Well, let me first say that there is a traditional tendency in Latin America for those leftist parties to responsabilize the United States for everything what happened in countries like Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and so on. As Bianca has already said, this movement happening in Nicaragua is a popular resistance against a dictatorship, and the United States has anything to do with this. It has been a spontaneous explosion of resistance of the people of Nicaragua against the Ortega family. It is very easy to put the United States inside of those things, and as I repeat, it is an old tendency of the so-called left, the ALBA left, those people that support Venezuela, Cuba, and so on, to put all responsibility on the United States' shoulders, as it would be a conspiracy against a leftist government. Ortega doesn't represent the left in Latin America anymore. It is a rightist government, like any others in Latin America, that repress people, that is against own people, and it is only a lie.
All right, those representatives of the Organization of American States convening the day after left-wing leaders met in Cuba. And there we heard from Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro. He attended that summit in Havana that also included the likes of Salvador Sanchez of El Salvador and Bolivia's Evo Morales.
Exactly 1 year ago, Venezuela endured 120 days of continuous street aggression by violent groups paid by the U.S. Embassy and promoted by a world media campaign to present a Venezuela in chaos, on the verge of a civil war, with a dictatorial government repressing a protesting people. That perfect script today is being applied to Christian Nicaragua, to Sandinista Nicaragua.
Why is it that people continue to support Ortega if his agenda is not a left-wing agenda?
Who's supporting him?
Well, you just heard Nicolas Maduro.
Well, he has an alliance with him, like many government, they have alliances, but here he's criticizing the hand of the United States once again. And regarding Venezuela, please, in a magazine, Foreign Policy, which is very serious, a magazine, last month it was written that there is a necessity of a coup in Venezuela. That's the title, in Foreign Policy.
All right, Cindy Regidor, you're in the capital of neighboring Costa Rica right now. What's the view from outside of Nicaragua as to what's going on?
The Costa Rican government has been very sympathetic to what's happening. It's actually one of the few countries which has put a lot of pressure and have spoken about what's happening in Nicaragua. We have her Chancellor, Epsi Cambelen, the President, Carlos Alvarado, speaking about what's going on in Nicaragua. It's actually the only Central American country that has been very belligerent in trying to come up with a solution, calling the government to stop the repression, and 7 former presidents also stated that they are very worried that this could become a civil war, and there is a need for international forces to do something before this happens. Today at the OAS, there is a discussion, maybe a motion or resolution speaking about what's happening and how the government is repressing the people might come out. I think this is very important to have governments talking about what's happening and also doing something, maybe thinking about sanctions, something. Nicaraguan people feel very lonely in this struggle because we have dead people every day, and the government seems to care very little about the situation, the economic disaster, and they just insist on staying in power for as long as they can.
And Cindy, let me ask you, the old left versus right divide, you've listened to this conversation. People bringing up the Sandinista ideals of 1979, the left versus right schism that still applies when you hear those regional leaders speaking. What do young people think of all this?
Well, for a long time, young people were not very active in politics. I think they were very disappointed in politicians. And many people now are very clear about how the Sandinista government has only used a left-wing discourse, left-wing speech, but that's it. In reality, they work as any other right-wing government. And what your other guest was saying about the ban on abortion, I think it's you can't underestimate what they did, because they banned abortion completely. And this is one of the most serious cases in Latin America, along with El Salvador. And that's something that Ortega did because he teamed up with the church. And now Ortega and his family is one of the most rich families in the country. And so you see that it's only speech, and the way they act is like completely the opposite. And when you see the newspapers back in the 70s, what Somoza was saying about the Sandinista cause, how they were terrorists, Ortega is doing exactly the same. The similarities, the resemblance is just uncanny, the way it resembles a dictatorship, and how they kill people because they think that that's what they have to do to remain in power.
Bianca Jagger, in the first part of our conversation, you called for sanctions against those close to Daniel Ortega. We saw a year ago how protests in Venezuela were essentially quashed. Is it going to be a similar scenario in Nicaragua?
I don't think so. I think that the fervor, the commitment of the people to achieve justice, to achieve democracy and freedoms, and to have a free election in Nicaragua is such that what is really very moving, and at times makes me want to cry when I get the phone calls from the students or from the people who are struggling against these very well-armed paramilitaries and police, is that the people are prepared to die, but the people are not determined to use weapons. That is what's so admirable, but as well, that is what is so moving, and that makes me so concerned every time I get the phone calls, is because I know they have no weapons to defend themselves. But let me say something that is really important, because I think that people need to understand this is not a left or a right-wing revolution or peaceful revolution. This is not in any way people who are thinking about left or right. All what people in Nicaragua are thinking at the moment is, how can we get rid of this dictator who is massacring our people? How can we have free election? How can we have justice? And how can we stop the murders from going on every day? The bloodshed of innocent people, of children, of students, of human rights defenders, of journalists, the attacks against the church, the attacks against the poor farmers. You have a leader of the farmers, or the poor farmers, or the campesinos in Nicaragua, who is in jail, and he's not even allowed. Medardo Mairena, with who I went to march with the poor farmers last year, who is not even allowed to have a lawyer to represent them. So the international community has an obligation to support the people of Nicaragua, to impose sanctions, but sanctions on the politicians and on the government officials, as well as on Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo. That is my call.
And we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Bianca Jagger, for joining us from London. I want to thank very much Sergio Ramirez for being with us from Managua, Cindy Regidor in San Jose, and George Kuzmanovic. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there. Yes, been taking a look at the coverage of this crisis, and it is quite surprising, really, given that this has its roots back in April of this year. There isn't as much as you might expect to see. Now, The Economist has recently written this article. Daniel Ortega is causing a bloodbath in Nicaragua. Could Nicaragua, it asks, go the way of Venezuela? And their image there has Ortega in the bloodbath, and the shadow on the wall is very definitely that of Nicolas Maduro. Now, in this article, they say it is by now a full-blown civil insurrection with mass casualties. But they say it bears many resemblances to what has happened in Venezuela, other than the fact that it has got so little attention. One thing that they do seem to be pinning some hope on is the idea that the army, though, is more independent than in Venezuela. And so so far they have stayed above the fray, but there is some kind of optimism that perhaps they could come in and act at some point. Others have taken to Twitter to ask that perhaps now that the World Cup is over, we can focus our attention on Nicaragua. Kids are being murdered and tortured by the leftist government of Daniel Ortega. An international community needs to stop it. More than 300 students dead. Could be as many as 400 now. We don't have the exact figures.
Officially, the toll is 280 so far.
Yes, a lot of people, though, are talking about figures far higher than that. And I think it's probably unlikely that we have an accurate number right now. One particularly vivid account of what has been happening recently comes from the Washington Post. Joshua Partlow was actually inside the church complex where there was that siege this weekend. Students have been seeking refuge, students who'd been protesting. Many of them were injured. They were looking for a safe place, looking for a place where they could be triaged. And so they went inside this church, and of course then 100 to 200 of them were trapped inside.
And there were international negotiations just to get ambulances in.
Yes, absolutely. And it's actually the clergy who managed to negotiate an end to this siege in the end. The first line of this piece, I think, really sums it up almost without you having to read the rest, although I do advise you do read this article. It is very interesting. The first student I met outside the Church of the Divine Mercy had a fresh bullet hole in his lower back. It's ugly in there, he said. It is a really vivid portrait. The fear, the defiance, the injuries, it is all writ large in this piece and is well worth taking a look at. Another particularly emotive and really bringing this whole story to life is a very brief video that's been posted online by two of those students who were inside that siege, leaving messages for their mothers, crying, sobbing. You hear the gunshots ringing out behind. And what they are saying is they are doing it for their country and they want to give messages to their mothers, and they aren't certain that they will ever make it out alive. Now, if you want to look at an entirely alternative universe, then take a look at Telesur. Their coverage of this is entirely different. The not-so-soft coup, they call this, saying that there will be celebrations tomorrow, which is also the anniversary of the original coup that Ortega oversaw. Many people now saying that he bears more than a passing resemblance to the man he usurped. But yes, the celebrations to mark that tomorrow will also be a celebration of the defeat of this not-so-soft coup, says Telesur. Looking at this government website, government news site as well, El 19, they refer to these students as being terrorists and criminals. But if you look on social media, the hashtags really say it all. I scream for Nicaragua. Nicaragua wants peace. And it really highlights the brutality of what is happening there. Now, this young woman is a young female doctor. On the right-hand side, you can see her being kicked in the head by a jackbooted paramilitary. Other images that we've seen, things like this, the kind of armory that is being left behind by those paramilitaries and police. And it is really a very shocking state of affairs.
James, many thanks for that. Thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here. More coverage on the crisis in Nicaragua on our website, France24.com.